Hi, peeps. You're listening to She's My Cherry Pie, the baking podcast from the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessie Sheehan. I'm a baker, recipe developer, and the author of 4 baking books. Each Saturday, I'm hanging out with the sweetest bakers around and taking a deep dive into their signature bakes. Today's guest is Sarah Fennel, the founder of the Broma Bakery blog. Sarah just released her debut cookbook, Sweet Tooth, 100 Desserts to Save Room For, and I am so excited to have her on the show. A self-taught baker and photographer, Sarah started her blog back in 2010 when she was a homesick college student, missing her mom's desserts. For the past decade, she's chronicled her bakes across her website and social media, building and captivating her audience along the way. She's known for showcasing a wide range of desserts, from elevated bakes to comforting classics to nostalgic flavors with a modern twist. She joins me to chat about her baking journey and how her cookbook came about. We also walk through the recipe for her caramel pumpkin layer cake, which is filled with cream cheese, buttercream, and drizzled with salty caramel. Stay tuned for our chat. If you'd like to follow along, you can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.com. Today's episode is presented by King Arthur Baking Company. Whether you're a serious baker or just a newbie, King Arthur is here to help you be the best baker you can be. Their flours are some of the most coveted in the industry, as you've heard from many of my guests. With the holiday season fast approaching, might I suggest tapping into King Arthur's host of resources to help you level up your baking game. With ingredients and tools for every baking occasion, over 2,000 recipes, and virtual and on-demand classes, King Arthur will guide you every step of the way. Did you know they also have a baker's hotline where you can speak to a professional baker 7 days a week? I mean, peeps, how cool is that? No matter your question or concern, King Arthur is here to help this holiday season and beyond. Head to kingarthurbaking.com to learn more and call 1-855-371-BAKE. That's 1-855-371-BAKE to try the hotline for yourself. This episode is presented by Kerrygold. Let's talk for a minute about butter, which is truly one of life's simple pleasures. Beautiful butters like those from Kerrygold are as good as gold to me and all the butter lovers in my life. Kerrygold butter is the most special of them all. It's made with milk from Irish grass-fed cows and has a rich flavor and creamy texture, thanks to its naturally higher butterfat percentage. This also gives Kerrygold butter that beautiful natural golden yellow color we all know and love. Think about how many simple, delicious moments involve butter. Making grilled cheese for a loved one. I mean, I can hear the butter sizzling in the pan right now. Can't you? Slathering butter on an amazing scone or banana bread that you spent your Saturday morning baking? Even just passing butter around a lively table when you get together with friends and family for a meal. There's a whole world of Kerrygold butters for you to discover and enjoy. Learn more at kerrygoldusa.com. Let's chat with today's guest. Sarah! So excited to have you on She's My Cherry Pie and to talk caramel pumpkin layer cake with you and so much more.
Hi. Oh my God, I'm so excited.
So you had the uniquely good fortune to grow up in a home with a mom who quite literally baked chocolate layer cakes on a regular old Tuesday night post-work for you and your sister. So please tell us everything about this incredible woman, including please tell me about her infamous coffee cake.
Oh my God, yes. Okay, so my mom was a single mom, worked full time, but had this massive sweet tooth. There's such a strong parallel between how she bakes and how now I bake. She had very little time to both go out to the grocery store and get things and to make things look amazing, but she also had this insatiable desire to have a cookie around at all times. So her baking was all about being really easy, things you could fit into your life, things you could do at the end of the day. And yeah, like sometimes that meant having a chocolate cake at the end of the day, which is ridiculous and amazing. But there would be so many times when there'd be a cake in our fridge and we'd just slice it throughout the week and, have that little moment. She really, I think, taught me that dessert is something that can fit into your life and not the other way around. I think dessert can take so many forms, and pastry itself is this whole other art form that I don't pretend to know. But this idea of still being able to create something really special and really unique But doing it in an hour or 2 hours, I think is something I absolutely learned from
Love.
her.
Tell me about her coffee cake.
Okay, so her coffee cake is a coffee cake that is a sour cream base. It has chocolate chips in the batter, and then it has this cinnamon streusel, like a brown sugar cinnamon streusel in the middle. It is so good. The funny thing about it is this was how so many of her bakes were. Now when I eat it, I'm like, okay, there's a little too much baking soda. Okay, this could go up on the flour or whatever it is. But that's what makes her bake so uniquely her. Like, they weren't perfect and they weren't the exact right technique or the exact right ratios. They just tasted so good and homemade, and like they had that love baked in. I know that sounds so silly, but that's how they taste. And this coffee cake is just like incredible. You can eat it warm in the microwave. You can eat it cold. You can eat it for breakfast. We would eat it for breakfast all the time.
I know that she gave you this like amazing 24-point font binder of recipes when you left for college. And of course, we all want to hear about that. But I just have to ask before we get into the binder, which I just love this idea. But did you bake with her when you were little? Like, were you into baking before you left for college?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Truly, some of my first memories are food memories. And it's like her making a lemon poppy seed cake and me licking the batter and being like, that is so good. And later finding out it was a cake mix that she added lemon extract to. Because, it was like those ways to make things easy, but very much always in the kitchen, baking with her, eating things mostly off of the spoon. Is how I did it. But yeah, this binder, oh my God, it just brings me so much joy to think about. I still have it in my little sentimental box. But going off to college, she knew that I would still want these desserts. And it wasn't a binder full of cooking recipes. It was truly a binder of baking recipes. They were things like the coffee cake, like her chocolate chip cookies, like a carrot cake she made, coconut cake, just all of these things that basically were the desserts we had growing up.
When you started to make these recipes at school, can you tell us like a favorite one? Can you tell us like something you
Yeah.
failed at, something
Yeah.
you loved?
Okay, I think like fall recipes in general were my favorites, and I would make pumpkin bread on repeat. Like pumpkin bread was my thing. I think one thing, and maybe I need to talk about this with my therapist, but one thing I really like about dessert is that you make it and you can have it throughout the week. I
Mhm.
feel like when you make savory food, leftovers don't hit the same.
Mhm.
But pumpkin bread, you make that, and on Tuesday it's amazing. On Thursday it's amazing. On Saturday it's still amazing.
Mhm.
Fails, I would say too many to count.
Mm.
So because my mom wasn't a recipe developer, the idea of developing my own recipes really took me a lot of time. And it came through a lot of trial and error. I would make croissants that the dough was like half laminated and the butter melted out everywhere. Like I knew nothing about technique. I would make things where I literally swapped baking powder and baking soda, and I'd be like, well, why? It was like a self-exploration and a self-education.
I love it. You famously started your blog, Broma Bakery, in 2010 because you missed your mom's recipes, although you had a lot of them in the folder.
Yeah.
So you were missing them and you wanted to kind of replicate them and make them happen. I love that. But the blog was not only to like satiate your sweet tooth and to remind yourself of your mom and home, it was also to practice your side passion, which was photography. I wondered, first of all, like, had you always loved taking pictures since you were little? And what were you photographing before you got into food? Or were the two always connected?
Photography was like my first passion, my first love. Maybe when I was 5, I got like one of those tiny
Wow.
toy cameras. I've literally tried to Google this and I can't find it, but it's like a plastic camera that you put regular film into, but it's like for children.
Mhm.
My dad was a news reporter. He would produce a lot of his own stories. Sometimes, he'd be working on the back end doing filming stuff, editing stuff. And so he always had a camcorder filming my sister and I at all times. He would basically produce our home movies. So like our home movies, they are fully produced
Honey,
things where
please have me over for movie night.
Yeah.
I want to see
No,
like
they're
baby Sarah
so- Yeah,
at
they're-
work.
Oh my God, I love it. So we would go on our little vacations, like up to Maine or whatever, or Nova Scotia. And my dad would be like, girls, wait. Okay, now step in. Okay, walk a little bit faster. Okay, could you come in from this angle? Like it was so I think for me, photography and videography and all of that was so a part of my DNA from a young age. And then in high school, I got into photography. I had a teacher who I absolutely loved. And I did photography all throughout high school. Analog, 35 millimeter film, absolutely loved it. And I really wanted to go to college for photography. I made a portfolio. I was doing mostly portraits. That was the thing I really liked. But then I thought to myself, I was like, it's 2009. who is a photographer? People like Annie Leibovitz. And I'm like, I'm not going to be her. So I scrapped it and I went to school for anthropology, which I feel like still scratched this itch of connecting with people and culture and things like that. But yeah, photography kind of took this back burner for like a year. And then I went to NYU. I saw all my friends doing all of these fun things at Tisch, taking photos out in the city and of their friends and doing all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I miss photography. It really came together where I was already baking.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be able to photograph something that was easy and I didn't have to produce a whole shoot for. And so I just started photographing the food in my apartment. It very much is my mom and my dad together. It's so interesting.
Oh, I love that. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Today's episode is presented by California prunes, the best kind of prunes out there. I am a big fan of California prunes for 2 reasons. They're a great addition to your pantry when it comes to smart snacking and baking. You probably already know that prunes are good for your gut. You might even know that prunes are also good for your bone health. But what you really need to know is that prunes are absolutely delicious in both sweet and savory dishes. But don't just take it from me. Here's what some of the country's top culinary experts have to say. Chef Bronwyn Wyatt of Bayou St. Cake says, prunes have an earthy, winey richness that pairs beautifully with the tart, fresh flavor of berries. Chef Kat Turner from Highly Likely in LA says, they are an incredibly versatile ingredient that strike a great balance between sweet and savory. They are incredibly sensual. Ana Castro from Akamaya in New Orleans says, prunes have a sultriness to them. They are very rich and like velvet. I like to use prune puree in my baked goods to give them great flavor and also to replace some of the sugar, eggs, or fat in the recipe. It's super easy to whip up. Just blend prunes and water together and voila. For recipe ideas and more, be sure to check out the California Prunes website at californiaprunes.org. Happy baking and happy snacking. This episode is presented by Ghirardelli, making life a bite better. I'm so happy that cozy baking season is in full swing. You know I'm all about easy peasy baking. So for all my professional bakers and pastry chefs out there listening right now, I want to make sure you've heard about Ghirardelli premium coating wafers. Peeps, do you have cookies or pretzels that need to be dipped or luscious fruit that needs to be enrobed? I love that word. Treats that could use a drizzle of something or a little dressing up for the holidays? Then you need to check out Ghirardelli Premium Coating Wafers. The best part? Ghirardelli now offers them in resealable 5-pound bags. While traditional chocolate can be temperamental, get it? Ghirardelli Coating Wafers require no tempering. You can just melt and dip. How easy is that? They come in both dark and white varieties, and the best part? They create a beautiful sheen and shape. Next time you're looking to cover and decorate your favorite baked goodies, give these compound wafers a try. To learn more about Ghirardelli professional products and request samples, visit Ghirardelli.com/professional. Or you can find their products at kitchen supply stores like Chef Store, Webstaurant, and Amazon. Big news from Cherry Bomb. The fall issue of their print magazine is all about the creative class, highlighting innovative and imaginative folks in and around the food world, including fashion designers, artists, photographers, and of course, lots of pastry chefs. There's even a recipe from my new cookbook inside. You can subscribe to Cherry Bomb and get 4 issues delivered straight to your door, plus free shipping. Head to cherrybomb.com for more. Now back to our guest. I want to talk about social media with you, just because
It's my favorite topic.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. I feel like you've always had super robust social accounts, but obviously you have 100% exploded. So I wanted you to tell us about that explosion. I also wondered how much of it was kind of pandemic driven. And please, can you tell listeners who don't know about your mustache wearing days during the pandemic,
Yes.
which are so
Yes.
frigging hilarious. Like, even saying it out loud, I'm laughing inside.
Yeah, so in the pandemic, I, like a lot of people, had no idea how to transition to video content. But long story short, I dressed up as Guy Fieri for a few videos and they went very viral. And I think that in general, something I've really liked about being in the blogging space is how it's evolving and how, in order to stay relevant in this space, you really have to evolve and adapt and add in new skills to whatever you're doing. And I think for me, social media it hits this really like vibrant, excited part of my brain where it's this mixture between data and analytics and marketing. And so you're able to, with every single thing you post it and figure out why was the reaction this way? How did people respond to this? What are people saying about this? And then be able to tweak and do a new data point. And you're doing that every single day for years and years and years. I think for me, I've just developed sort of this sixth sense of how to analyze and then from there, how to pivot and move. And that's just been so important in my growth. I love social media for that way. Like, I would be lying if I said I didn't like the performance of it. But for me, the reason social media is so exciting is just because it's this constant fluctuation of data that you get to change and tweak and see success from immediately.
I was hoping that you could describe your dessert style. I know you've talked about like elevated bakes and comforting classics, nostalgic flavors with modern twists. Tell us all about it.
I would say that my dessert style is very much a daily or a weekly do it off the cuff dessert. I want a dessert that I really can go into the pantry and be like, oh yeah, I totally have everything to do this. I don't tend to myself make desserts that are ones that I have to go to the farmer's market for. I have to go to a specialty store for. I want a dessert that I can have right now, that I can fit into my life, and that feels, relatively easy.
I know that sometimes you'll use like a boxed cake mix. There's a little bit of like store-bought pie crust in your pie cookies.
Yeah.
I love the freedom of just using everything and not being like ashamed of it. Not that anyone should be ashamed of using
No,
anything
totally.
that comes from the store, but talk to me about that. You're very
Yeah.
homemade, but you're not afraid to grab something from the store that is less homemade.
Absolutely. I think that we have to go back to my mom for this. She had this thought with dessert that like you could still make an amazing lemon poppy seed cake. It really didn't matter if it was from a box or not because you'd still jazz it up in some way and make it your own. Adding that lemon extract, she would add like triple the amount of vanilla, things like that. Adding a little bit of Greek yogurt or something like that just to make it extra moist. And I think that there's so many different reasons why people create dessert. For some people, it's because it's a fun challenge. For some people, it's because it's a way to flex some technique muscle where they feel like they've created something extra special. And I think for me and for a lot of my audience, it's so much more about the enjoyment at the end. And so it doesn't really matter how you got there. I never want something to taste like it came from a box. But if it did come from a box, I think there is nothing wrong with that because we're looking at home bakers who don't have time to do all of these things. And in the end, all they want is to be able to put something down on the table and for their friends and family to be like, yes.
I love the way a chocolate like boxed or a vanilla boxed cake tastes. So I'm
It's
just
so
always
good.
trying to make all my cakes taste like
Tastes like
boxed
that.
cake. I want that. I
Yeah.
want them to be that moist. I love
Yeah.
that flavor, the texture, all
That's
of
how I
it.
feel about brownies. Like,
Yes.
I'm always trying to get my brownies to taste like a boxed brownie mix. I don't want any of the yuck from it, but
Yeah.
like I want that chew. I want that like thin, crackly top.
I totally hear what you're saying about like easy recipes, being able to make them from your pantry, but I do get some like perfectionist vibes from your
Yes.
book. I have one of these in my last cookbook too, but the giant chocolate peanut butter cup, which is so delicious. Love that so much. But you actually like shape the peanut butter part and roll it out so it
Yep.
looks perfect. So I had two questions. Is it kind of like once a perfectionist, always a perfectionist, or is it something you move into or lean into? And also, it's so interesting because I do get perfectionist vibes, but all of your reels are super fun and
Yeah.
casual and low key and
Yeah.
just muddy buddies and
Yeah.
brownies. And I love it all. That's so special about you that there's both. I
Thank
feel like
you.
some of us are just muddy buddy. That would be
Right.
me.
Right.
And then some of us are perfectionists, but you're both.
Yeah. I would say once a perfectionist, always a perfectionist for sure. But also, I really like instant gratification. So I think that those two parts of me mold into what you're talking about. So with instant gratification, sometimes you're going too fast. Sometimes you mess things up a little bit because you're just so excited to get it done. And I think that's where that's born out of. The other part of the perfectionist that comes up is my food styling days and the way I think. I care so much about the way that something looks. I really want that presentation to look elevated, still effortless, still homemade, but very much like everything has a place. I think that's where some of that perfectionism comes in. Like if you're going to take time to take 5 bars of chocolate, I want to make sure that when that comes out of your fridge, it looks really good and it doesn't look lumpy. And when you cut into it, it doesn't look uneven. That's really important. You have to make sure that you have some sense of technique in there. I think that's where that comes from. And I also think, yes, the desserts are easy and nostalgic and you can use a box mix. There is this element of perfectionism in there. I think there's also this element of kind of wanting what you do to be unique and special and exciting. I want to make sure that when someone is baking, that they don't just feel like, I could have found this on any website, or like I could have just Googled this and figured it out. I really want them to feel like, wow, that's something that I never would have thought of, or I never would have done it that way. Or when they bite into it, they're like, oh my gosh, I get it. That 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract, it really does make a difference. So that's something I really try to add to all of my recipes, like making sure they have that little like je ne sais quoi,
The food styling aspect of it, I didn't even think of this. As a photographer, and before you had a book,
Yeah.
that was all you,
Yeah.
correct? The beauty of your food photography is
Yeah.
not only the way you take the picture, but it's how you're arranging the image.
Absolutely. When I develop recipes, I very much am thinking of the visual of them. And there's so many recipes that I would love to do, but they would just be too ugly. It's kind of like this little puzzle for me figuring out, okay, how can I keep the flavors that I want and how can I keep it in that form that I want, but it's all beige. So what can we do to fix that?
Yeah.
It's definitely a part of things.
I'm so excited to talk about Sweet Tooth. I wanted to ask about the book deal. Assume that somebody came to you, that you were not trying to walk around town getting a book proposal out there. But tell us about that.
Yeah, so Clarkson Potter approached me, and they're the publisher that I went with. I had been approached probably like a few dozen times by publishers in the past, and I was at this stage, this was all before the pandemic, where I felt like I was big, but I wasn't big enough. I knew that if I was going to put all this energy and effort into this book, that I really wanted to be what I felt like was on the top of my game. I think people do book deals for so many different reasons, and there's no bad reason as long as you obviously don't feel like you're being taken advantage of. But for me, I knew that I wanted to feel like I was at the top of my craft in so many ways before saying yes. And so really, it was that Clarkson Potter emailed me when I felt like, okay, I think I'm there. It's time. And I met with my editor, and I absolutely loved her. Everything was feeling right. I had had other conversations in the past, and it didn't feel totally right. The publisher was maybe smaller, or the amount of money they were looking to give me was smaller. And this was like, okay, I think this makes sense. So from there, we sort of backed into it. They provided a few different agents that I could interview that are obviously independent from them. And I found my agent. I absolutely love her. She's incredible. Kitty Cowles, I love you. It really just felt like I had started to see the drain. What is it? Where like something goes around the drain and it's starting to get to the middle. I'm like, yes, okay, yes, this is all making sense. So then we, wrote the proposal. We gave it to Clarkson Potter first, and then they were like, okay, yeah, let's do it.
So the book is a mixture of recipes from your blog, inspired by your blog, and also new recipes. Which fan favorites from the blog did you know you had to include in the book? And did Potter have rules for you? I know sometimes only a certain percentage of a book can have recipes that have already been in the world.
Yeah. So our rule was no more than 20% had to be existing recipes. So I really knew that those existing recipes, there had to be a reason that they were in the book. Number one, the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. Those are in the book. They absolutely had to be. I pushed so hard for those to be on the cover, and I'm so glad with how the cover turned out. But I was like, we need the cookies on the cover. Love, love, love that recipe. The Matilda chocolate cake is the gluten-free vegan chocolate cake from the site, which is just amazing. Little backstory on that cake. When I was living in Detroit, my girlfriend had a birthday party. I said, oh my God, I'll make the cake for you. She was like, great, but I'm vegan and gluten-free. I was like, this is new, but okay. So I took my chocolate cake that I made all the time, and I made it vegan with flax eggs, and I made it gluten-free with gluten-free flour. And it was the best chocolate cake I'd ever had. And it was because the flax eggs, they add this like tiny little slight nuttiness, but also when you bake up eggs in a cake, sometimes it can give a little too much tight structure to a cake. The flax eggs keep it so soft and melty. And then the gluten-free flour also provides this light, slight nuttiness, and the crumb itself falls apart a little bit more. And so it really works in the cake to just make this cake that like absolutely melts in your mouth. So the Matilda's chocolate cake happens to be vegan and gluten-free, but not because you need it to be. So that's in the book. The oatmeal cream pies are so good.
Would you say that the book has kind of the same style as the blog? Stylistically is similar, Americana classics kind of vibe?
That's a great question. I would say it definitely comes from the same place, but we played around a little bit more. The flavors are a little bit more unique, exciting, different, a little more seasonal. We really just wanted to sort of test how much we could work with all of these different flavors and have this really large breadth of things. It's interesting because on the blog, there's so many reasons we're posting things, right? One is because, oh my God, that sounds so delicious. Let's do it. Another is for SEO. So like creating these recipes that are going to get us high traffic to the blog to bring us in new readers and bring us in page views every month. I would say, if anything, the blog recipes are a little more basic. And in this book, you're going to still get those basics, but there's a lot more fun.
Love. I wanted to talk about two general things about the book that I loved. The first is I love when you say the biggest secret in the dessert world is under baking, because I could not agree with you more. I am a total like moist crumb or go home girl when you're
Absolutely.
checking on to see if a cake is ready, or I like to see a raw center of a cookie.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for putting that in print.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, you just
It's
like
so important.
yeah, it's so
And
important.
I think too, for a lot of people who are just starting off with baking, they're so stuck to the times, right? Like, oh, 13 minutes. Okay, it looks right, but that recipe said 13 minutes. And I think that having that flag and that caveat in the beginning for anybody who's baking, if anything, take it out a little too soon. You won't regret it.
Couldn't agree more. And the other thing that I was fascinated by is you don't have weights in the recipes. And that just blew my mind. And I just had so many questions. But you have some lemon meringue pie macaron that definitely, they don't even have volume measurements.
Yeah.
Those you have to weigh.
Yeah.
But I had a couple of questions about the weights. I know they're not in the blog, so it makes sense that they're not in the book in terms of the Broma audience. But was that a hard decision? And did you get pushback from Potter?
Surprisingly, literally no pushback from Potter.
Amazing.
I was actually surprised by that.
Yeah.
So here's my thoughts on it. For this first book, I knew that the audience was going to be mostly an American audience. And knowing the types of recipes in the book, the way the book is portrayed, who the book is really for, it really is for people who, yes, they want to have something really exciting, and they've definitely made cookies before, but they probably don't have a scale. Or if they do have a scale, they're scared to use a scale. American audiences in general, they use cups and they use volume measurements. So, okay, I'll do that. I will say that it's been so interesting to see feedback of how many people do want those weight measurements. And so in the second book, I do plan to do that.
Yeah.
I think it also helps to just make the recipes even more precise.
Mhm.
So I see that. I'm always putting myself in the shoes of somebody who's just starting out.
Mhm.
Just starting out doesn't mean that you're relegated to boring, silly, easy stuff. Just starting out can still mean you want something really exciting like a bumbleberry tart. But as the author, I feel like I need to provide the confidence to people that they open up a page and it doesn't seem like, oh my God, whoa, okay, I have never done this before and I'm just going to shut the book. That was sort of my thought process going in.
So now we're going to talk about the recipe, your caramel pumpkin layer cake. You write that it's like a pumpkin bread, only softer and lighter, even more moist. It's layered with cream cheese buttercream, drizzled with this sticky, sweet, salty caramel. You describe the cake as being a little bit extra, which I feel like is so you. Am I not wrong there?
Yeah.
And then I also love that the cake is assembled by hand.
Yeah.
No special equipment and kind of is one bowl-ish. I also love that. So first things first, we're going to make the cake. We're going to heat our oven to 350 degrees. We're going to line the bottoms of 3 8-inch round cake pans. And you like that USA brand?
Love USA pan. Yeah.
So we're going to line the bottoms of 3 8-inch round cake pans, USA brand, with some parchment paper. And then we're going to grease the sides of the pans with nonstick cooking spray. So I had a question. I'll spray the whole thing and then put the paper down. But you're a paper first girl and then the sides?
Yeah, and it's just out of being lazy.
Yep.
I just literally want to use less spray.
Yep, I love you. Lazy is good. Lazy totally flies. Then in a medium bowl, and I think your fave is like a glass Duralex.
Yeah, so there's a glass Duralex mixing bowl set. You can get it on Amazon, and I use them all the time. They're like workhorses in the kitchen. I love that you can mise en place things out. Like, they're the best.
I also love, because I'm a big like melted butter girl,
Oh, yeah.
I love that you can melt butter in the microwave in that bowl and then like proceed with the recipe.
Yes.
Melt chocolate in it. I think you even mentioned that.
Yep.
Yeah, I love glass bowls too. And of course, they're good for video.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
look
yeah.
great for
Yeah,
video.
yeah. So in a medium bowl, we are going to whisk. And you like a balloon whisk? Is that your fave?
I go back and forth. Okay, so Crate and Barrel has a really lovely whisk. I think they call it a balloon whisk, but I like a combination between a balloon and a French whisk. Some French whisks I think are a little too narrow, but if you can find like a wide French whisk, I love that.
So, like if a balloon and a French had a baby.
Exactly.
Yep. So we're going to whisk pumpkin puree. Is it a Libby's pumpkin puree?
I will say I always reach for Libby's.
So we're going to whisk together some pumpkin puree, some granulated sugar, vegetable oil. We're going to add some eggs, some vanilla extract. I know you like Nielsen Massey, but also Rodell.
Yeah, Rodell is like my go-to. Nielsen Massey is if I want to be extra fancy, but
Okay.
I think Rodell does a phenomenal job.
Awesome.
But honestly, I will say with vanilla extracts, someone like us would notice the difference in taste, but just get the best vanilla extract that you can afford.
Yep, agreed. I also kind of like the nostalgic flavor of McCormick's. I'm not going to lie. Please keep listening, listeners. We'll set that aside. In a large bowl, we're going to whisk together all-purpose flour, and you're a King Arthur
Love
girl.
King Arthur, yeah.
Some baking soda, some baking powder, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and you like the Simply Organic
Yep,
brand?
Simply Organic is how I like to roll. And I will say this cake and all of my pumpkin recipes, they use a lot of nutmeg. I would say most pumpkin recipes around this size would probably use like a half teaspoon of
Mhm.
nutmeg. I think the nutmeg adds so much depth of flavor that you just like cinnamon's kind of top noted. Nutmeg, there's something that's a little deeper in there. So I just love a big amount of nutmeg. I think
Ooh.
it's a teaspoon in this
I
recipe.
love that.
It's a lot.
I love that.
And then the ginger you got to do.
Yeah.
Ginger adds a really nice brightness to it, a little tiny bit of spice on the back end. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then we're going to add some salt. You're a Morton's table salt
Oh, hell
person.
yeah.
Not a kosher salt person, but we
No?
can substitute if we want to.
You could totally substitute, yeah. For all the recipes in the book, you can substitute kosher
Right.
salt.
Okay, so we're going to make a well in the center of the bowl. We're going to pour in our wet ingredients. We're going to whisk until no streaks of flour remain. I love that you do not switch to the spatula here.
No.
I love the idea that we didn't even have to grab a spatula to make this cake.
Yeah.
Love that.
I feel like especially when you're mixing larger amounts of things, if you're folding with a spatula, it's just a little bit taxing. And for something like this cake, especially because it's oil-based,
Mhm.
that mixing with a whisk, it's going to be hard to overmix unless you're just standing there. Like, it's going to come together pretty fast, so you're not going to get that insane gluten development that the whisk can sometimes do.
So I love that you don't switch to a spatula. I also love that this is a one bowl-ish recipe and that it didn't call for any special equipment.
Yeah, I mean,
Yay.
like, honestly, guys, if you wanted to do this fully in one bowl, you absolutely could. I myself am pretty much like if I can one bowl it, I do. My little one bowl technique, if you have your wet ingredients, first then when I'm doing my dry ingredients, I'll put my flour right in on top of the wet ingredients. Then I'll basically try to put all of my tiny ingredients, my baking powder, my baking soda, my spices, my salt, kind of all into the center. And then I'll take my whisker, my spatula, and I'll brush it over the top, kind of like you're doing a little, like a sand garden thing with a rake. And that will sort of help to get it distributed on the top end. And then you can start folding things in.
You know what I do, which is I learned from Deb Perlman. Take your wet ingredients, put in the leavening first and whisk, then add spices, salt, etc., and then add the flour at the end, because that way you can vigorously whisk in the things that you're worried about, which are your leavening and spices and salt, which need to be distributed evenly, and then do your flour last.
That's so brilliant.
It's smart,
Wait,
right?
I'm going to try that.
You should.
I love
It's
that.
incredible. Now we're going to divide our cake batter evenly amongst our prepared pans. And because of this perfectionist vibe of yours, are you actually like measuring out how much goes in each cake pan so that each layer is exactly the same height?
It depends.
Okay.
Some recipes, I do that because I really want it to be absolutely perfect.
But in something like this, you would eyeball it.
I would. And what I usually do is I'll take a knife or my finger and I'll just stick it into the center of the cake and see where that cake comes up to.
Done that.
So,
Been there, done that. So now we're going to bake until the cakes rise, the tops spring back when we touch them, and a butter knife inserted in the center comes out mostly clean. A crumb or two is fine. That's for like 25 to 30 minutes. I'm so curious about the butter knife.
Yeah.
Instead of a toothpick
Yep.
or instead of a paring knife.
Okay, so a butter knife is a more dull knife. So when you stick it in, it's going to allow crumbs to attach better. When you stick in a paring knife, your paring knife can slice through so precisely and so sharply that when it pulls out, you might not get the crumbs pulling. Because when you think about it, a cake has slightly harder surface on top than it does inside where the crumb is. So when you put in something really sharp like a paring knife, you're not creating these little micro ridges around the slit. So when you pull up that paring knife, it could be that those crumbs get caught and they don't actually come off with your knife. So with the butter knife, we get this kind of imprecise dig into our cake, but our slit has a lot of like room for the crumbs to come up and pull up through. So you can see those crumbs more easily.
And I know you like under baking, so here, seeing some crumbs on that butter knife is what we want.
100%. So cakes, because they're a little bit thicker, they're a little bit bigger, they are going to continue to cook as they cool, like all baked goods. In every single recipe, I make sure that it says when you stick a knife in, it's a crumb or two attached is okay.
Yep.
Those crumbs are so fine. We love the crumbs. It shows that there's still moisture in our cake.
So we're going to place the cake pans on a cooling rack and cool them for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then we're going to remove the cakes from the pan. We'll like drag a butter knife around the edges, flip them onto plates, and then peel away parchment and then reinvert them onto our cooling rack. I just learned this, spraying your cooling rack. Because do you sometimes get cake layers that stick a little bit as they cool?
Yeah.
I thought that was so interesting.
That's so smart.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. But anyway, just a thought. So we're going to let them cool for about 30 minutes while we make our caramel. And I love this. You say that the caramel is optional, but
Is it really?
Yeah, I love that. So in a small saucepan, and I know you like that Goldilocks brand or you like All Clad.
All clad, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
In a small saucepan over medium-low heat, we're going to cook granulated sugar. Since we're making this dry caramel, is it important that the sugar is like in an even layer in the pan, or is that less important? Can you kind of just pour it in?
You can pour it in. I mean, I do a little shake before it hits the stove, but I will say I think the most important thing is to use a small saucepan and not a medium. If you go to medium, then that sugar is going to spread out a little bit more and you might get some uneven patches. If you have like a little thicker layer of sugar, when you mix it around, you're able to just get it a little more even. So I think that's like
That's
what
such a
I
great
like.
tip. We're going to use a silicone spatula to stir the sugar occasionally, scraping down the sides and bottom of the pan. I think I didn't realize it was okay. You know how like you're making caramel and they're like, don't stir it.
No.
Is it different if it's a dry caramel? Is that why it's okay to stir?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think for this caramel, we're going to this softish stage.
Mhm.
So I feel like you can be a little more imprecise with it. This is the most forgiving caramel recipe. You could have never made caramel before and you're going to be totally fine. You could have a giant clump in one corner of your pot. You're going to be fine. Like it's going to be
Love it.
okay. So
So you say first the sugar might form clumps,
Yep.
then they're going to begin to melt. You're going to take it off when it's like a light golden color.
Yep.
About 5 to 7 minutes, it'll be fully melted. Once that last bit of sugar is melted, we'll take it off the heat because we don't want to let it continue to cook or it'll
Yeah.
burn.
But
Then-
that's one thing I love about this recipe. You don't need a temperature thermometer for it. The cue is a visual cue.
Yeah.
It's as soon as it's melted, done.
I love that. So we're going to add some unsalted butter to the pot. It'll violently bubble, so don't be
It
scared.
is violent.
We're going to whisk the butter and the melted sugar together until combined, about 20 seconds, whisk in some heavy cream and some salt, and then we'll allow the caramel to cool completely in the pan until we're ready to frost our cake. Could you kind of make it ahead, pour it into a bowl, and put it in the refrigerator?
You're talking about my life.
Okay.
Yes. So you could absolutely make it while it's still hot, pour it into a glass container, and leave it in the fridge. I mean,
Great.
it's totally fine.
Great. Now we're going to make the cream cheese frosting in a stand mixer fitted with a paddle attachment. Can we use a hand mixer?
Yeah, totally.
Yep, or a hand mixer. We'll beat some room temp butter and room temp cream cheese on medium speed until combined. We'll add some confectioner's sugar, some vanilla, some salt. Beat on medium speed until frosting is fluffy. Ta-da!
Ta-da!
2 minutes, 20 seconds later, we're done. Now we're going to assemble our cake. We're going to place the first cake layer right side up on a plate or a cake stand. When you're doing it on a cake stand, do you put a sheet of parchment or something underneath the cake so that you can easily lift? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So what I usually do, and I'm not saying this is correct, it's just what I do. I usually will peel off the parchment paper, take my spatula that has frosting on it, and just do a little glue of frosting on the bottom, and then I'll put my cake on. Once we're done with all of our nice putting the cake together, frosting everything, I'll then use a bench scraper on one side and a really sharp knife on the other side. And I sort of use that to shoot into the middle together and then pick it up. And so that works great for me. But I like that because with the glue on the bottom of the cake, when it's on that like rotating cake stand, the cake's not going to be falling over everywhere.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we're going to spread a large dollop of frosting on the top of our layer. Using an offset, we'll spread evenly to the edge of the cake. Repeat with the second and third cake layers and our dollops of frosting. We'll frost the sides of the cake with the remaining frosting. So no crumb coat.
No crumb coat.
I love you. Do you ever do a crumb coat?
I do sometimes do a crumb coat.
Okay.
For a cake like this, first of all, so some cakes are crummier than others. This cake, the cake really stays together. That moisture in it really keeps it together. So you're not going to find as you're dragging your frosting around the outside that the cake is following you. So it's very easy then that way. I also find that I will do a crumb coat usually when I want my frosting to look perfect and have that like really nice sharp outside. One thing that's so fun about this cake is that it has that caramel dripping down the bottom. So it's kind of nice to have little imperfections that then those caramel drips kind of like bump off of. So
love that. So we're going to place our room temp caramel in a squeeze bottle or in a piping bag with a small tip. If it's too thick at this point, maybe because we put it in the fridge or it just sat for a while, we can microwave it for 10 seconds to loosen it. And then we're going to start from the center of the cake, squeezing out caramel in like a really tight spiral, going all the way to the edge of the cake. And I assume each time you do the spiral, it starts to bleed.
Exactly.
So that probably by the time you get to the edge, you've covered the top in caramel. Then, once you're at the edges of the cake, you're going to make almost like a small zigzag-like movement along the edges to allow the caramel to make those luscious strips. When I'm picturing you making little tiny drizzle, are you almost like you make a zigzag and you let it drip? You make a zigzag or you're not even...
I'm going around the whole thing at once.
And you're not actually even trying to do anything. It just happens.
It just happens. Yeah, it happens on its own.
Gosh.
So it's like, it really is a tiny zigzag. And when you do the zigzags, you want them to be a little uneven because you want some drips to fall a little bit more, some drips to fall a little bit less.
Yeah. First of all, do we need to set the caramel before we serve it?
It depends how messy you want your cut to be.
Okay.
If you're like me and you just want to eat your cake, you can cut it.
Yep.
If you want to put it in the fridge is totally good. Like it can sit in the fridge all afternoon.
Yep. Although I hate cold cake.
I hate cold cake too.
I really want room temperature cake.
I know. It's like that frosting gets so sad. You miss. Okay,
yeah. So we can either keep cake as it is. It's like a drizzle cake at this point, and let the drizzle do the talking, as you say.
But that's a really good point because we're doing the drizzle. That drizzle, if you're doing your tiny zigzags, the drizzle will sort of stop. It should stop halfway down the cake, 3/4 of the way down the cake. Some will go all the way down the cake. But because you're doing that drizzle, it's kind of nice to serve it right away because you want that drizzle to be fresh and not continue to droop down over time.
Makes sense. We can either keep the cake as it is or we can decorate the top with fresh blackberries, figs, pomegranate seeds. Love, love, love. So I wanted to talk just about a couple of other recipes.
Okay.
First of all, oatmeal cream cookies. That is in the top 5 of all-time best recipes on the blog. Yes?
Yes.
Tell us everything.
Oh my God, it's so good. Okay, so I feel like oatmeal doesn't get a good rap. Oatmeal is sad. Oats are sad. They don't really have a ton of flavor. But when you pair them with these warm, really soft spices, so things like brown sugar, oh my God, it's like they just come to life. And so these cookies are just so absolutely incredible. It tastes like early fall in a cookie, like before you get into pumpkin season, you gotta have a little oatmeal. So they have an amazing chew. The crumb is really unique because it's held together enough. Like when you bite into it, there's a little bit of like a toughness before it gives, which is really nice. But it also has the slightest crispy outside, which I absolutely love. It also has, I think, a really nice ratio of oats to cookie. Sometimes I find that oatmeal cookies in general have too many oats in them. And those oats tend to expand. They tend to absorb liquid. And so it happens when you bite into it that it's just a little too oaty. It's almost like bready. And I think this is a really nice ratio where like you taste the oats, but the oats aren't overpowering the rest of the cookie. The frosting is really delicious. It's thicker because you really want, first of all, that nostalgic sort of icing, frosting-y. I interchange those words. I don't know, whatever. It's so nice when you bite into it because it almost feels like it came from a package. And it has a lot of vanilla in it, so you really get a nice vanilla flavor
I
in
love
there.
it. I have
Yeah.
never been an oatmeal cream cookie person, and I need to
Oh my
become one.
God.
I know. I don't know what
Oh my
I'm
God.
waiting for. What am I waiting for? That
I
sounds
like
so yummy.
I feel like I need to go home and make those.
Yeah.
Like, truly, these are one of my favorite recipes.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have it. So, yeah, it was a recipe on the blog. It did well on the blog.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not one of our most viewed recipes of all time on the blog, but it's one of those blog recipes that I'm like, no, people need to know about this.
Mhm.
It is so good.
Yeah.
And then also, I love the size of these. When you scoop them out, you're going to think that the cookie's way too small. And it's going to be like, do I need to do double this amount? But they really spread. And they spread into this like perfect little disc that, you know, it's like a little 4-bite cookie.
Yeah.
Oh, love.
So good. So good. Tell us about the caramel cookies and cream ice cream. And I love the little Starbucks origin story.
Absolutely. I feel like caramel and cookies and cream are both very sweet, but they also go so well together. It's just that hit of sugar that it's so good. So then we need to find something to balance that. So we're going to balance that with something a little bit more bitter, and we're going to have coffee, and coffee's going to be our base, and it's going to be so good. I will also say, in general, I think Oreos and coffee go so well together. They're just amazing. But the caramel adds this really luxurious hit to it. It also adds this new texture into things. And it's just this little unexpected flavor that you get in that kind of complements the warmer notes of the coffee. So I absolutely love it.
Love.
That was hard getting the caramel consistency right for that, because you can't just create a regular caramel. If you do and then you put it into your ice cream, it's going to disintegrate into that ice cream as everything freezes. So we had so many iterations of that recipe where everything was the same except for the caramel. And we really just needed to make sure we could get that ribbony caramel so that when you scoop into it, it's not too hard and it doesn't hit your ice cream scoop, but it's not too soft that you're like, where did it go? So
Do you
that's
remember
such
what the
fun.
secret was that thickened it up?
It's just getting the exact right ratio of
Yeah.
butter and
Yeah.
heavy cream in there.
Yeah. Oh my God, it sounds so good.
So,
And it was
so
like
good.
kind of based on like a Frappuccino you loved?
Yeah. So at Starbucks, there's a Frappuccino that I would ask for, and it's coffee Oreo Frappuccino. And then they just do a little drizzle of caramel on top. And
Hello.
it's like,
Yum.
okay.
Yum.
Always?
Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Sarah. And I just want to say that you are my cherry pie.
Thank you so much, Jessie. I could do this all day. It was such a treat. Thank you.
That's it for today's show. Thank you to King Arthur Baking Company, Kerrygold, California Prunes, and Ghirardelli for supporting this episode. Don't forget to follow She's My Cherry Pie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and tell your pals about us. You can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.com. She's My Cherry Pie is a production of the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. Thank you to CityVox Studio in Manhattan. Our producers are Carrie Diamond, Catherine Baker, and Jenna Sadu. Thank you so much for listening to She's My Cherry Pie, and happy baking!